Is your snare drum up to the test? Do you know what the test is? When it comes to shopping, it's doubly important because if it doesn't pass, it's going to save you some serious coin, and honestly, none of this is getting any cheaper. But this test is relatively simple, and we're going to share it with you today. It's possible that you've been watching this series for years and maybe don't even know what my name is. And that's okay, because in real life, when you meet a new person, you introduce yourself, you see if you have some things in common, and you start a conversation. The fact is, it's easy to skip over some of these things and not even realize that you might be from the same town as that person, maybe even gone to the same high school as them, if you don't ask questions and get to know them. Whether you're borrowing a drum or shopping for a new one, this is exactly the same way that we get to know drums here. This may sound a little woo-woo, but it's the best way to understand not only if a drum is going to do what you're looking for, but also what the one in front of you is really capable of. The first thing I look at when I pick up an unfamiliar drum is the snare mechanism. I want to know if it's complicated, if it's simple, if it has operative things on both ends of it, and also if it's functioning properly. In the case of this drum, it's fairly simple. It's a lever mechanism, it's only on one side of the drum, and the travel is more than enough to go from very loose to very tight. The next thing that's important to look at is the hoops. We want to know what the style is, and by virtue of that also how stiff and how heavy they might be. In the case of this drum, we have die cast, which is pretty much the stiffest you could ask for and is going to influence many things that come in terms of both the sound and how we approach the tuning. Your drum will also have lugs on it, and there's going to be a certain number of them. Is it 10? Is it 8? These are important things to know. The drum we're using today has 10 on each side, which is going to tell us a lot about what we can get away with at a given tension. With this drum's combination of 10 lugs and die-cast hoops, this is an easy one to get really high into the stratosphere tuning-wise. All of these things we're talking about, we could infer the result, but this is really more about knowing what it is so that after we've experimented, we can put that knowledge away for later. Now it's time to talk about the shell of the drum itself and the two big variables that are part of that. Let's flip the drum over and consider first the bearing edge. In the case of this drum, we have 45-degree bearing edges that are not particularly sharp, which means that we're going to get a lot of wood contact with the head itself. This will give us a certain kind of behavior at any tension that the drum is tuned at, but particularly fatten things up when we get really high. The most unusual facet of a lot of snare drums turns out to be the snare beds themselves. This drum has almost no snare bed at all. It's so shallow that initially we thought it didn't have one at all. This is going to influence snare response at every tension along the way with the snare mechanism, and also give us bigger and breathier snare response across the tuning spectrum. This collection of things that we're assessing ahead of time before we start to tune is going to be the lens through which we look at everything that the drum does as we experiment with the tuning. No matter what version of these aspects of the drum you have at home, learning about them, knowing what they are, and by experimentation, understanding what they do is your best friend. At this initial tuning, we have good articulation, we have a fair amount of tone. It's a pretty short sound because it is on the higher side overall, and this is also appearing to be a fairly bright drum fundamentally. Some of the construction aspects of this drum are really lending themselves to a cutting, brighter tone, which is going to be interesting to explore when we start to go to other ranges, just to see how they affect the overall sound. This drum currently has a fairly medium tension on the batter head, and the snare side head is on the higher side of medium, which is well within the range of what we would normally use, but now it's time to explore. When we're assessing the snare side head, there are a handful of things that are really important to look for before we start making tuning adjustments. First one, and the big one, is it over-tensioned? Is it reefed? Is it tabletop tight and possibly stretched so far that the hoop is flush with the edge of the drum itself? Things like that are going to limit what we can get away with that particular head, particularly if we want to tension it down from there. If this is something that you've experienced when looking at a used drum that you're considering buying, and you don't have the opportunity to swap that head out for something fresh, that's a good time to walk away from that instrument because you're not going to be able to really understand its capabilities if the snare side head is in that condition. Less common but also important things to look for are whether or not one side of the snare side head is tensioned dramatically more than the other to the point where the hoop is actually not level with the edge of the drum. This is also going to remove any possibility of you being able to get clear articulation out of the snare wires or an even tension on that head. Lastly, and maybe the most obvious, is if there's visible damage to the snare side head, such as indentations, holes, or tears, that is really going to stop us from being able to use it. A very small adjustment to the tension on the snare side, specifically lowering it down a little bit, really opened up the tone from the batter side without actually adjusting the batter head at all. In spite of the very small adjustment to the snare side head, the note feels significantly longer, particularly in terms of the decay of the snare wires. This is exactly the sort of tone control concept that's come up in many videos before, where it's natural for people to want to make adjustments to the batter head when they want more tone or a longer note, when that actually resides on the other side of the drum. Part of the value of moving really slowly and doing this with your own drum is that the degree to which this is going to change and the resolution of tuning that's going to get it for you is going to be different from drum to drum. So getting to know each individual instrument is why we do this every single time. No matter the nature of your drum in terms of how many lugs it has or the dimensions, these tiny adjustments are going to inform you going forward when you want to make adjustments on the fly, or if you need to quickly make adjustments and make sure that they are exactly what you need. At this point, I'm feeling good about the sound that I'm getting, but in terms of exploration, going further down with the pitch of the snare side head could be a really useful experiment. There will be diminishing returns at a certain point, but they're going to depend on things like where your batter head's tuned, as well as other aspects of the individual drum. On the other hand, if you want it to go up, there's a whole other set of variables that are going to come into play there, and big effects to the behavior of the batter head, particularly in terms of the presence of harmonics, definitely worth exploring. We look at the batter head similarly to how we look at the snare side head, but generally speaking, it's tougher, and even if it's got a little bit of wear on it, the likelihood is that we'll still be able to make some tuning adjustments and get a sense of the drum. Having said that, under a lot of tension, particularly the batter head, is not necessarily going to telegraph how much damage and wear it has, so pitching that head down a little bit is going to tell us a lot more about the lifespan of that head and just how much we can get away with before we have to change it. Now we're going to pitch down the batter head and see what we get at a fairly significantly lower tuning. I'm curious to see how it interacts with the snare side tension and also with the current wire tension. This was a shocker for us, actually. We talked about it a little bit. Initially, we both felt like the first tension we had on the batter head felt medium, but this meatier, fatter, but still really punchy tone is starting to give us more of a sense of medium in terms of a drum this size. These kinds of surprises are one of my favorite aspects of these kinds of experiments. No matter how much you think you know, if you don't try it out and really get into the nitty-gritty, you actually never know, and you can start to get a false sense of security in terms of what you think your drum is capable of. By going down into this pitch range, the tone has got even broader, the snare response is even longer, and it's bordering on pillowy, which I personally believe is a function of the style of snare beds that are on this particular drum. This is exactly why we do that assessment at the get-go of looking at all of the components of the drum from the outside. If we didn't know that this drum had an almost non-existent snare bed, we might be led astray and start doing a bunch of tuning adjustments based on the snare wire behavior. Now, in furtherance of these experiments, we're going to go the other direction with the batter head and try to really utilize some facets of this drum for a really high tuning. Okay, cards on the table, this is a little less surprising. If you like to tune high, this is the jam. Die-cast hoops are excellent for this. Hard, powerful shell. Everything about this drum is geared toward this kind of sound. What was unexpected, especially for me, because I've, again, spent very little time with this drum, is that it still has full snare response and a fat, punchy sound, even when it's tuned pretty much as high as I would normally go. This is the sort of thing that if I didn't do these explorations, I might consider not even bothering, because a lot of drums can't handle this. But if I don't know that about this one, it's definitely worth the journey. This is also a good moment to call back to why we're using very ordinary heads on this drum. If you're using a head that really brings a specific kind of sound along with it to your instrument, you're working within the confines of that head. Anytime we're doing a snare spotlight or really analyzing an instrument here, we try to go for the most basic, standard setup we can to really give us insight into that instrument. If this video feels reminiscent of a snare spotlight, it kind of is. These are the methods that we use to explore instruments that come into our possession, particularly ones that we've never seen or played before. This kind of exploration helps us to help you understand the capabilities of those instruments in case they're interesting to you. But today's video just goes to show you that even an instrument that's been in the possession of the studio here for a really long time still has surprises if we're just willing to look. It's really important that we circle back to that initial examination of the drum before we started hitting it or tuning it at all. There are patterns, and we need pattern recognition when it comes to being able to plan for an outcome, and that is super true when it comes to tuning a drum for a certain kind of sound. When you know what a certain kind of bearing edge or a certain kind of snare bed or just a certain kind of hoop is going to do over the course of the behavior of tuning a drum, you can infer and plan for that. If you don't know what's going to happen with those particular variables, it's kind of like driving with one eye closed. You lose your depth perception, you might still get there, but you're not going to get any of the details along the way. Once you've spent a lot of time with these individual variables and really understand the pattern recognition involved in that, that methodology will help you to understand exactly which things about the drum are contributing to the behaviors that you're trying to make adjustments to. The last thing you want is to spend all day trying to tune the batter head only to realize that there was something wrong with your snare wires or maybe something wrong with the other head. If I had a nickel for every minute that I did that when I was younger, I would have an awful lot of nickels. But that also got me to the point where I can hear a drum and make a very educated guess about what needs to happen. The best part of pattern recognition and the methods that fall out of it is saving you both money and time. We don't need gear around that's not doing what we need, and ultimately, we want to be able to get the sound we're looking for fast and easily. So sit down with a drum, any drum you have, go through these methods and learn to understand why you're getting the results that you're getting and learn to manipulate each one. The more you do that, the faster you'll get, these patterns will become second nature, and every drum will be whatever you need it to be.